These are the lessons that I wish somebody had taken the time to share with me before it was too late. Living with type 1 diabetes isn't just about numbers. In fact, it's about embracing this challenge that has no finish line, enduring and shifting from shame to embracing this challenge, and ultimately about living with an invisible illness that can cause unseen challenges. Today I want to talk to you about the three enemies, invisible they may be, that nearly took me out. There's the first one. It builds slowly. You don't even know it's winning until you're lying on the floor, numb. Then there's the second, the one that hits you like a freight train and hijacks your breath before you have a chance to speak. And the third, it's the one nobody talks about, the one that whispers to you, nobody understands you. See, mental health, like type 1 diabetes, is an invisible struggle, one that no one else is going to know is going on with you. And if you lack the proper strategies, you may find yourself isolated and suffering without a rope to climb out of the deep, dark pit that you've fallen into. Now, my name is Matt Van de Vecht. I've lived with type 1 diabetes for a little over 15 years, and I've struggled with mental health ups and downs pretty significantly over the entire duration of my life. And in today's episode, I want to bring these two seemingly different topics together in a crossover that shows you how they are more connected than you may have ever been taught. In fact, this is something that is often overlooked in the medical system, and without the three strategies that I'm going to teach you today, you might find yourself in a similar position to where I was many years ago, where I didn't know if life was worth living. See, I learned how to manage the carbs, take my insulin, pre-bolus, do everything that I was supposed to do, but nobody warned me that there's an unseen side to type 1 diabetes, outside of it being an invisible illness as well. But this unseen side, this mental health struggle that many people deal with, it needs more attention. So today in this episode, I want to not only shed light on three different areas of mental health that type 1 diabetes has directly had an impact on in my own life, but also help to demystify them in hopes of bringing you a strategic path forward, whether you're dealing with it now or if you want to protect yourself against encountering this in the future. This video is for anyone silently struggling. You may not even realize it yet. Today, I want to talk to you about the three core enemies of type 1 diabetes: burnout, anxiety, and isolation. And ideally, get to the root of these before they take over. So number one, it's this thing called burnout. You've probably heard about it. There's a phrase that goes together with it called diabetes burnout. And there are a few different stages of this that I won't spend too much time on today, but understand that there are different levels of burnout. And before you get to burnout, you might be experiencing diabetes distress. Now, this is ultimately centered around an unwant to take care of yourself. It's not necessarily an unwillingness, which is what burnout might lead into, where you simply do not take care of yourself. But the challenge here is that burnout is a lagging indicator. In fact, you might not even know that you're getting closer to burnt out until it happens. It catches you and it takes over. And by that point, you might not care that it's taken over. And that's truly the danger that burnout brings. With burnout being a lagging indicator, though, it's critical that we identify these symptoms early on. And within burnout, I would say that there are these different levels to consider, but I'll give you a story from my own life to shed some light on what it might look like. See, last year, I became an Ironman. And if you don't know what that is, it's a race where you swim 2.4 miles, then you bike 112 miles, and then if that wasn't enough, you go and run a marathon at 26.2 miles, all in the same day. It's actually crazy. But in the process of training for an Ironman while living with type 1 diabetes, and as somebody who typically has a little bit of a struggle with mental health and has had a history of that, it was unwise of me to take on that immense task while also trying to launch my first book, which is the Blood Sugar Freedom Formula, which is out now. So you can go get it. It did make it out. But doing that while raising a family, running a business, I simply had too many balls in the air that I was juggling. And I reached a breaking point where I actually pulled my family aside and I told them, hey, I'm going to finish this. Like, I'm stubborn like that, right? But I told them I'm going to do this, but I feel that I am at my breaking point. Like, I am at my capacity. This is the limit. And my family, my wife first is who I talk to about this, and then my parents, actually, because they've seen me grow up surrounded by some mental health struggles. I was actually diagnosed with depression at a very young age. And from there, I've had experiences with suicidal ideation. I've had a lot of experience with anxiety and PTSD and borderline agoraphobia, which is where you're scared to leave the safety of your house. I chuckle because it's almost funny to think about how different I look to some people online and how they would never guess that. Oh, the Ironman, he doesn't have fear, right? He doesn't have anxiety surrounding blood sugars. But the reality is, it's an invisible illness, and it's one that I mask very well. At least I think I do. I don't know. You tell me if you think that, oh no, he clearly suffers with that kind of stuff. But when I encountered this symptom, I noticed that my mental health was declining. I recognized the symptoms because I am so familiar with them from growing up with depression and some very, very dark thoughts and encounters. That when I got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 19, I found similar symptoms creep up a few times. Once before this, when I had a near-death experience from an urgent low blood sugar. If you want that full story, I'll put it in the description. But now, these events in our lives can bring about a lot of dark feelings, sad feelings, depression, anxiety, fear. Mental health is not often talked about enough in the type 1 diabetes world. So when we have a lagging indicator like this that slowly builds and eventually takes over, it's really important for us to grab it by the horns the second we notice it. Now, dealing with depression, burnout, these are things that oftentimes are going to be helpful to address head on, but also to respect them, to recognize that probably means that we have a need to slow down. And for me, I refused to slow down, and I watched as my mental health got worse and worse and worse. And I got to a breaking point where I actually did reach burnout. I stopped taking care of myself for the first time in 5.5 years. I did not hit my standard 90% or better time in range, which I know sounds crazy, but hear me out. I had pristine control 5.5 years straight, above 90%. And then I got to a place where I did not care and I let go. A record for 5.5 years. And then one day I just said, you know what? Screw it. And see, here's the thing. For some people, that moment of despair could be their last. I'm fortunate to have a very strong support system around me who caught me when I fell. And even still, it took me a few weeks to get back on the horse. Burnout, depression, mental health as a whole needs to be respected, and it's something that I wish I had been taught earlier. Now, what might burnout or depression start to look like? Some of the early signs is simply losing interest in taking care of yourself. Losing interest in your goals. For me, it was the 90% time in range. I simply didn't care anymore. It might look like skipping meals. It could look like skipping workouts, skipping important meetings, skipping family functions. It could look like laying in bed all day. It can look like a lot of different things, but ultimately it looks different. And that's what I want you to look out for, that this is just not who I am. If people are starting to tell you, hey, is everything okay? Something looks different. Something has changed. It's time for some introspection, to look inside and say, how am I feeling? 0 to 10. How are my emotions right now? So for me, what's interesting is that I didn't snap one day and it was like, he's all fine. And then he's depressed. I slipped little by little down the slope of depression into burnout until finally I realized I had nothing to grab onto and I couldn't climb out. I had reached the bottom and I didn't know what to do. Now, the second piece to this puzzle that I want to cover today is anxiety and fear. Now, anxiety is something that honestly I thought was made up until I experienced it myself. Hate saying that because now that I've experienced it, I know how very real it can feel. But anxiety largely is our imagination. And I can say that now because I've dealt with it. So ultimately, experiencing anxiety panic attacks, actually being labeled on my medical sheets as having anxiety disorder and panic disorder. That's fun. Yeah, got that a couple years ago when I had that near-death experience when I was in a foreign country, had an urgent low, almost died, hospital couldn't save me. It was terrifying. From that event that also gave me PTSD. I hate labels, but I'm just giving you some of these so you know that I'm speaking from experience. I realized something about anxiety is that it doesn't really creep up on you. It can, right? Anxiety can lurk in the background and then it kind of triggers, right? But what I found more true for me is that the anxiety didn't exist until there was a trigger event. And once it was triggered, it now became my norm, and I had to fight against it and work my way through it. See, anxiety for me was a fear of the unknown. It was a fear of the what ifs, right? It was my imagination getting the worst of me. So I found that my anxiety, which surrounded low blood sugars specifically, and this can vary. I have some clients that I work with privately who have anxiety around high blood sugars because they were told by their doctor, if you have high blood sugars, you're going to get your legs cut off, right? As horrible as that sounds, there are people out there who are being told things like this. But for me, it was anxiety around low blood sugars. And the big identifier that I found was it wasn't the low blood sugar that I was scared of. It was not knowing how low it was going to go. So getting to a place where I would be dropping and I didn't know where the floor was. In other words, I didn't know where my blood sugars were going to stabilize and bounce back. And so when I saw that I was an arrow down at 90, I imagined arrow down at 20, right? In my head, it's just going to keep going forever until it hits zero. So anxiety is this imagined future where my brain in survival mode is trying to protect me, which I appreciate, but also quit it, right? Like that's so dramatic that my brain's like, you're gonna die. And I'm not even low yet, right? Because a low is below 70 milligrams per deciliter. And I'd be panicking at 90. Now, full transparency, there was a time after that near-death experience where I would panic if I had double arrows down at 170. Kind of hurts to admit that, but that's the truth because I got so used to seeing numbers in the 200s and 300s after that event because I was so terrified of lows and terrified of insulin that I was so nervous about dropping rapidly. Even at 170, I still imagined this is the one that kills me. I'm going to hit zero. Right? So anxiety, unfortunately, can be overpowering, and it can also mimic the symptoms of low blood sugar. Shakiness, pale skin, increased heart rate, rapid breathing. Sounds familiar, right? And it can be debilitating. It can also be the reason your A1C is high, where you have a subconscious fear of low blood sugars, and as I did, you naturally run a bit higher because you're scared of lows, so you let blood sugars run higher and you keep them consistently above average, and it gets your A1C to creep up and up and up over time because you're not addressing the root cause of anxiety and fear surrounding low blood sugars and or insulin. So how do you fix it? What's the answer to anxiety? Just get over it, right? I used to think that. Kills me that was actually my thought process behind it for a while before I understood what it truly was. What it truly is uncertainty and imagination combined. It's an uncertain future where we fill in the gaps to identify all possible threats and imagine them as real so that we can be ready for anything. But then what ends up happening is that we suffer more in our imagination than we do in reality, and it plagues us. So what can we do about it? Get familiar with it. Face it head on, safely, in small amounts. But what I found in my own practice is I reached a point one day where I realized I was scared of going outside by myself because going outside of the house meant leaving the safety of the kitchen where all of my low snacks were, right? So what I chose to do, because I realized I didn't want to live the rest of my life in a house and never leave. That sounded terrible. And like that would push me back into depression as well. It's a fragile balance we have here. So I realized I needed to take action and do something about it. So I grabbed my backpack. I kid you not, I stuffed it full of about 100 grams of carbs, fast-acting carbs, and I walked to the end of the driveway. And where I live in San Diego, that's like 100 feet. It's not even like a mile. You know, some people have long driveways. No. It's like 100 feet. And that made me nervous, but I did it to prove a point. I went out, I came back, I didn't die. And granted, I did that where my blood sugars were at like 100, right? So I was like, oh, it could drop. I don't know. But that micro step in the right direction, that micro exposure, you may have heard of exposure therapy, is what worked for me. After that, I got a little bit more confident. I walked down the street with my 100 carbs in the backpack. I didn't die. Okay. Grabbed my sister, said, hey, you want to go on a walk with me? She's like, I guess. She was visiting, and I was like, and she knew I was having a hard time. I was like, I'd like to go for a walk with you. We can chat. And she was like, I know, you're just trying to be brave, So she's like, I'll go with you. We walked around the block. Now that was like a mile, right? Didn't die. So I'm logically convincing myself, I didn't die. I didn't die. I didn't die. See how safe you are. I was proving to myself that my thoughts were not trustworthy and that I needed to hit the reset button on this whole fight or flight thing because I was existing in fight or flight. I was going into panic mode, literally panic attacks, at least once a day. Horrendous quality of life. And I found that most of my fear was baked around the uncertainty of my blood sugars. I didn't know if they were going to go low or high. So for me, what that meant is, and I'll pull this up, what that meant for me was finding blood sugar formulas, right? So I wrote a book on this because since then, these have saved my life and given me my quality of life back. But the book's called The Blood Sugar Freedom Formula because it gave me freedom. Because see, I found that with blood sugars, it's all math, right? How much insulin you take for how many carbs, this is your blood sugar response, everything is numbers. And once I figured that out, I gained certainty again. And from certainty, I climbed out of the bottom of rock bottom. Like, how they talk about you're at rock bottom? I felt like I was buried beneath the rocks at rock bottom. And I first had to push the rocks off of my chest before I could begin crawling out from rock bottom. That first step for me was a deep understanding of fear and of blood sugars. And from that certainty, I built confidence step by step through exposure therapy. When I did that, I was able to prove to myself, I'm not dying, I'm okay. And I've taken that mentality all the way to becoming an Ironman, a 140.6 mile race. And during that race, I want to tell you one of my mantras that carried me through. It's fine until it's not. In other words, stop worrying about the stuff that's freaking you out, Matt, because it's not a problem yet. And for context, I was saying that while sitting at 70, my blood sugars, and having consumed 150 carbs and it not coming up from 70, because exercising for that long does a number on your insulin sensitivity. So I was a bit nervous, but I also realized it's fine until it's not. I'll give you one more mantra if you're a fan of these. I have a 100% success rate in treating low blood sugars. Try that one on for size. You're still here with me, watching this, listening to this, right? So technically, you have a 100% success rate when treating low blood sugars or high blood sugars, whatever it is. You're here, you have succeeded. Good job. Now keep it up. See, I used to think fear was a sign that I was failing. And now I know it's just a signal that I can retrain. In fact, I've chosen to use fear as a bit of a test for which way I should go. As long as it's safe, truly, when I'm scared of something, I do it. I didn't want to do an Ironman. It scared me, so I did it. And I'm stronger because of it. Fear is important. It keeps us alive. It keeps us aware, but it doesn't need to stop us from doing what we want. Now, the last one I want to cover today is a bit trickier. Isolation, shame, guilt. See, this one isn't as obvious, and that's what makes it one of the more dangerous options within mental health mastery, because we don't think we need to master it since it's not our mental health, it's our environment. It's our situation. It's isolation due to a lack of community, surrounding ourselves with other type 1 diabetics, because who knows an entire community of type 1s? I only knew one other type 1 diabetic when I was diagnosed. One. You can't build a community around that. And that's more than most. Most people don't know other type 1s in their life. Or whatever you are struggling with, you probably don't have a full, strong community surrounding that. So it can feel isolating, and it can also feel shameful. You can feel guilty because when people around you don't truly understand what you're going through. I actually just got off a consultation with one of my new clients where we were talking about this. The significant other that this person was with tries to understand. They do. They love them. They support them, but they will never fully understand, right? These are the kind of people that in their best intentions will tell you to take insulin for a low blood sugar or to eat some sugar because your blood sugar is high, right? It's a misunderstanding. It's unfortunate, but the reality is they will never truly understand what it's like to live with an invisible illness. And I'll give you a very specific example from my own life recently that links us back to anxiety as well. I realized recently that I've still got some anxiety surrounding my device changes. I wear an insulin pump and a CGM, and I realized I have hesitation surrounding my CGM site changes and my insulin pump site changes, because I don't know that they're going to work perfectly. So if I've got a site that's working right now, I don't want to change it because I have changed my site and had things break. The signals don't work. There's a sensor error. My insulin has an occlusion, doesn't work. It's complicated, right? It's out of my control. And when you're not surrounded by others, it can feel isolating because either you're inconveniencing people in your life who don't have diabetes, like asking for help when you have a low blood sugar. I used to feel terrible for asking for help, so I just wouldn't. I would suffer silently. Or it can look like you asking for help and being rejected, which also feels terrible in a very different way. So surrounding yourself with the right people, the people that not only understand, but will also lift you up and empower you, is critical. This is why when I take on new clients, we don't just work one-on-one, we also have communities. We've got thousands of people that live with type 1 diabetes working together to achieve a common goal, which is freedom with type 1 diabetes, right? We look at the crossover between quality of life and peace of mind, how to have happy blood sugars and a happy life. But we do it together because together we are stronger. See, those three enemies, burnout, fear, isolation, they don't show up on your Dexcom or your CGM, at least not initially, right? But they show up in your outcomes, your A1C, your time in range. They show up in how you show up, and they're just as real and just as deadly. I'm curious, though, as we wrap this one up, which one of these has quietly been showing up in your own life? For me, I've experienced all three and then some. I haven't talked about everything in this video, and if this is helpful and this would serve you well, let me know if I should spend more time talking about this and some of the real life experiences I've had down these darker paths. And while you're letting me know that in the comments, I also want to share with you something that I wrote down that I thought was important enough to put in this episode. So I'm going to read that for you now. Mental health doesn't follow the same rules as blood sugar. You can do everything right and still feel completely undone. The truth is, if your mental health breaks down, your physical health never stands a chance. But if you can heal your mind, even just a little, your body starts to follow. Healing is possible. Not perfect, but possible. In fact, this is why I wrote my book. All right, I mentioned it earlier in the video, but it's called the Blood Sugar Freedom Formula because it gives us freedom through formulas. It unlocks that certainty that I was after when I was experiencing a lot of these darker thoughts, the anxiety, the fear, the uncertainty, that once I had a blood sugar formula in place, it allowed me to lift my head up from the darkness and actually look around and enjoy the view. Actually to see my family in a new light, to be present, to not be so clouded by the what ifs of diabetes. So if you're finding that you've got these silent killers, these difficulties that only you know about because they are invisible to everyone else, you might find this book helpful in that it will not only bring more certainty to your blood sugars, but you'll also read a bit more about my own mental health struggles, how I overcame them, and ultimately how blood sugar formulas gave me my life back. So you can find that if you're interested on Amazon, the Blood Sugar Freedom Formula. But do stick around because we are stronger together. Hit the subscribe button, check out the next video, stick around to learn, to feel supported, drop some comments if you need some help. Happy to help where I can and if I can. And as I tell all of my clients at the end of every coaching call, every training, every masterclass that I teach, keep up the fight. It's worth it.